There are two kinds of people in the world, my friend. Those with a rope around their neck and the people who have the job of doing the cutting. Listen, the neck at the end of the rope is mine. I run the risks. So the next time I want more than half.
You may run the risks, my friend, but I do the cutting. If we cut down my percentage. Cigar? Liable to interfere with my aim.
But if you miss, you had better miss very well. Whoever double-crosses me and leaves me alive, he understands nothing about Tuco. Nothing.
Welcome to Bakyard Poker, a channel dedicated to expanding your poker palette beyond just Texas Hold'em. I'm Ryan, your host, and this video will discuss community card games. This is part 9 of my Poker Basics series. This video will assume you already know the poker hand ranks, betting, and wildcards. So if you're new to poker, I highly recommend you view at least parts 2, 3, and 7 before continuing here. Texas Hold'em players familiar with the poker hand ranks can skip part 2. I'll provide links to all my previous Poker Basic videos in the description below. So this video will discuss the use of community cards in poker games, a new betting twist with required betting on each card, the addition of the Thorn and Kill cards to make things more interesting, and 2 sample games using community cards. As you may have guessed, community cards are cards that are used by every player to complete or aid their poker hands. They may be dealt face up or face down to be flipped over later. For an example of a community card game, we need look no further than the granddaddy itself, Texas Hold'em. For the new poker players, Texas Hold'em is dealt with 2 cards down to everyone and 5 cards up as community cards that everyone can use to make their best 5-card poker hand. After an initial betting round, 3 cards are dealt face up. Then another betting round is done. Another face-up card is dealt with another betting round. Then one last card is dealt face up and a final betting round is done. This video is not meant to be a tutorial on how to play Texas Hold'em, but only to highlight how community cards are used in them. Now let's talk about how community cards can be used in your home dealer's choice, aka backyard poker games. There are a lot of ways community cards can be used, so I will focus on ones that are most common. In the future, I will post videos on other community card games which may have other interesting twists and turns to them. Let's talk about a few new concepts for community card games. Then I'll show you my first example game. This variation on betting can be used on community card games, but make sure it's allowed by the house rules first. House rules and poker etiquette will be covered in the next part 10 of this Poker Basics series. So a simple example of this is a game where 4 cards are dealt face down to each player, then 3 more are dealt in the center of the table as community cards. The dealer then points to each card from left to right and declares the bet amount required for each card. So starting with the leftmost card, he would say quarter. Then point to the next card and say 50. And then the last card and say 75. That means that each community card has a minimum bet amount that you must bet to stay in the game. You cannot check. Your options are to open or call, raise or fold. The other concept here is progressive betting. All this means is that the bet opener moves clockwise around the table for each betting round. So player 1 would open for 25 cents. On the next betting round, player 2 would open for 50 cents. And on the next betting round after that, player 3 would open for 75 cents. If the house rules do not allow required bets, you can still use progressive betting without the required amounts. To better illustrate this progressive required bets, I'll show an example game I play a lot called Little Elbow. Okay, so this game of Little Elbow starts out like any home poker game, where the dealer shuffles the cards, offers the cut to the player on the right, and all players put in their ante. And for this game, we'll use a quarter ante. The dealer then deals 5 cards face down to each player, then 3 community cards face down in a right angle configuration. The dealer then announces each required bet amounts for each card. So a quarter for player 1, 50 cents for player 2, and 75 cents, the elbow card, for player 3. And just to make things more interesting, the elbow card will be wild. Now this card configuration may be a little strange, and that's because this game actually has 2 options for how you can use the community cards. You can either use the 2 cards vertically or the 2 cards horizontally with your whole cards to give you the best 5-card poker hand. The dealer then flips over the first card, and player 1 must either put in 25 cents or fold. Player 1 decides to put in the 25 cents, and all the other players will call the bet. Then the dealer flips over the next community card, and player 2 must either put in 50 cents or fold. Player 2 decides to open for 50 cents. All the other players will call. The dealer then flips over the elbow card, which is wild, and player 3 must put in 75 cents or fold. Let's take a look at everybody's whole cards to see where we stand. Now remember, each player can use either these 2 cards vertically or these cards horizontally to make their best 5-card poker hand. Player 1 could use either one because he's only concerned about the wild card, which he also has in his hand. So combining those gives him a 4-of-a-kind queens. Player 2 has the same type of hand. Using this wild card and this wild card and the 2 kings, player 2 ends up with a 4-of-a-kind kings. Player 3 has a pair of 10s, and only the elbow wild card can help his hand out to give him a 3-of-a-kind or trip 10s. Player 4, the dealer's highest hand is just a straight, jack high. 7, 8, 9, 10, jack. So it was still player 3's bet with 75 cents to stay in or fold. With his hand, he decides to fold. Now the 75 cents goes to player 4, the dealer. Player 4 doesn't like his hand, and he decides to fold. Now the 75-cent requirement goes to player 1. With his 4-of-a-kind queens, he feels pretty confident and will put the 75 cents into the pot. Player 2, with his 4-of-a-kind kings, also decides to stay in and calls the bet of 75 cents. On the showdown, the cards would be revealed, and player 2, with his 4-of-a-kind kings, would win the game. And that's how you play the game of Little Elbow. Another variation on this game is Big Elbow, where 5 community cards are dealt out in a right angle configuration, and only 4 cards are dealt face down to each player. You would then turn over 2 cards on each side at a time for the quarter, 50, and 75 bet. And I forgot to mention, it's up to the dealer to decide whether the elbow is wild or not. And by the way, if you get a little confused about what actual 5-card hand you have, just lay your cards down. Remember, the cards do the talking. The other poker players will help you figure out what you actually have. Now let's talk about the concept of the Thorn and Kill cards.
What you talking about, Willis?
Thorn cards are community cards that represent a card rank that each player is required to discard from their hand if they have the matching value. So in this example here, if this card was a Thorn card and flipped over, any person with a 6 must discard it by putting it on top of the original card. You then play your hand with the remaining cards.
What you talking about, Willis?
Kill cards are community cards that represent a card rank that, if you have the same card value, will require you to immediately fold and leave the game. The Thorn and Kill card usage must be verified that they are allowed under the house rules. Now let's show the second sample community card game that's called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Okay, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a 7-card stud variation that combines wild cards, thorn cards, and kill cards. So after the dealer has shuffled, offered the cut, and all players have anteed, the dealer deals out the beginning of 7-card stud, 2 down and 1 up. Immediately after that, the dealer deals 3 community cards face down, which will be the good, the bad, and the ugly. The first card here, the good, is a wild card indicator. It is not part of your hand. It is only an indicator of what is wild. The middle card is the bad, the thorn card. Any player with the same rank as that card must discard that card and place it on top of it. This includes all cards, whether face up or in the hole. Anyone caught with a thorn card during the showdown will be immediately disqualified from the game. The last card here is the ugly, the kill card. Any player with the same rank face up, not face down, must immediately fold and cannot win the game. Any matching cards in the hole are safe from this kill card. After the 3 community cards are dealt out, the first betting round commences with the highest poker hand showing, which would be player 2's ace of spades. Player 2 decides to open for a quarter. Everyone else just calls. Then the dealer deals out the next up card to everyone, which is 4th Street, and then will flip over the first community card, which is the good. This is the wild card indicator. So 8s are wild, but the 8s are not in everyone's hand. It's just an indicator of what's wild. And then we have another betting round with the highest hand showing, which is still player 2 with the ace 3. Player 2 decides to check. Player 3 decides to check. The dealer, player 4, decides to check, and player 1 decides to check. Since everyone checked, we move on to the next step. The next step is the dealer dealing out 5th Street and then turning over the bad card. So remember, the bad card is the thorn card, where everyone who has this card, whether face up or face down, has to discard it. In this case, the 8s. So here's an interesting scenario. And again, I did not set this up. We have an 8 here, which is supposed to be wild. But because this thorn card is shown, 8s are still wild, but they also have to be discarded. So let's take a look at everybody's hands in the hole to see if anybody has 8s. Yeah, 1 here. So player 3 had to get rid of 1. So player 3 only have 4 cards to work with, while the rest of the players have 5. So essentially, the wild card 8s are nullified from this game. And again, the person with the highest poker hand showing starts the betting, which is still player 2 with the ace-jack. Player 2 decides to open for a quarter, and everyone else calls. Now the dealer deals out 6th Street, and the dreaded ugly card will be flipped over. Now keep in mind that if an 8 were dealt out on that last card, it would have to be discarded, but that didn't happen. But what did happen with the ace being the kill card, player 2 who has an ace face up has to fold and is out of the game. Sorry for your luck, player 2. With player 2 out of the game, the highest poker hand showing now is player 1 with the king-queen. So he would open the betting. He decides to open for a quarter, and the rest of the players who haven't folded will call. Now the dealer deals out 1 more card face down, just like in regular 7-card stud. And there'll be another final betting round with player 1. But let's just show each player's hole cards to see where we stand. Keep in mind that if an 8 was dealt face down on that last card, it would have to be discarded by that player. So player 1 begins the betting again, and with his hand only having a king high, he decides to check. Player 3, who has a pair of 10s, he decides to open for a quarter. Player 4, the dealer, who has a 2 pair, kings over 6s, decides to raise a quarter, making the total bet 50 cents. That's too rich for player 1, who decides to fold. And now player 3 has to decide whether to call the bet, raise, or fold. Player 3 decides to call the bet. Now obviously the hole cards would not be shown until the showdown, but we kept them face up for demonstration purposes. So player 4, the dealer, with the 2 pair kings over 6s, would win this game. And that's how you play the good, the bad, and the ugly. Community cards can really create some suspense and intrigue in your poker games. I'll provide worksheet links in the description for the 2 games I demoed here, Little Elbow and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Now on to the question of the day. What is your favorite community card game besides Texas Hold'em? Leave me a comment below. The next part, Part 10, will be the final chapter in the Poker Basics series. It will cover the all-too-important topics of house rules and poker etiquette, so be sure to check this one out. If you enjoyed this video, click the like button. If you're enjoying this series, click the subscribe button. If you're eager for new videos, click the bell icon. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next video.
You pig! You want to get me killed! When'd you unload it?
Last night. You see, in this world, there's 2 kinds of people, my friend. Those with loaded guns, and those who dig. You dig.
Where?